The Uncanny Valley is a widely recognized phenomena of being creeped out by entities with near-human likeness. This was originally explored by Masahiro Mori, a Japanese robotist who is exploring the relation between the affinity humans feel for robots as robots approach a near-human likeness. That being said, right as robots peak in their similarities physically to humans, meaning how close they appear to being human, humans' affinity drops dramatically. This is the Uncanny Valley. I first became interested in the Uncanny Valley after playing The Cabin Factory, a recent indie horror game that displays a variety of scientific horror concepts exceptionally well with the layout of its cabins and the NPCs in-game. That being said, when researching how this game was so much scarier than other games I'd played in the past, it led me down an Uncanny Valley rabbit hole. As I stated previously, almost everyone is aware of the Uncanny Valley effect, especially as robots and AI become increasingly more prevalent in today's society. That being said, I don't think the implications of the Uncanny Valley are fully understood, nor the effects they have on the gaming industry. For example, when I realized I wanted to do a video on this horror media effect, meaning the Uncanny Valley, I looked up which games often identify as falling into the Uncanny Valley, and not a singular horror game came up, which kind of confused me. This in turn led me into an even deeper rabbit hole on why people don't identify the Uncanny Valley in horror media. In today's video, I want to explain in an easy to understand way what exactly the Uncanny Valley is, how it was originally founded, and where our research on it is today. Then I want to explain how this functions in horror media and how elements of the Uncanny Valley can be used to maximize the horror experience. I have no qualifications in game design other than I am a gamer and have been for the majority of my life, but where my qualifications do lie is in psychological research and the application of such research. And I also like to think that I can put two and two together every now and then, so that's what we'll be doing today. I will be using The Cabin Factory as my primary example for the concepts we'll be discussing today, but you don't need to have played the game in order to understand the discussion. I'll provide a brief synopsis of the game's functions, and if you'd like to hear more about The Cabin Factory and its horror, I have a video diving into other topics that we can see in the game and how it plays out. Link for that video, as well as all of the sources I will use today, are in the descriptions below. Before we get into today's video, I am definitely not Cobbs. This is my second channel. On my first channel, I play primarily Ark and other survival crafters, but I like to play a lot of stuff other than Ark. I like to play a lot of horror, and I like to talk about it. This is my channel where I get to talk my shit. And today, I'm going to be talking about the Uncanny Valley. As a disclaimer, this video was uploaded in February of 2025, I believe, but I'm moving a lot of my horror-based content over to this new channel, so if you've seen this before, I'm sorry. I doubt you have, though. It's a pretty good video, though. You should watch it. One last thing, I want to say thank you to everyone who subscribed to the Patreon and made this video possible. I really appreciate your support. It means a lot to me, and it allows me to do cool shit like this. All right, back to the video. Enjoy! First, I want to lay some groundwork for the Cabin Factory itself. In the Cabin Factory, you play as a cabin inspector, checking cabins to see if they are haunted or not haunted. The cabins created in the Cabin Factory are scary cabins meant for Hollywood and theme park usage. The cabins that are haunted have some form of movement in them, so when you go to inspect cabins, you have to pay close attention to each item in the cabin. Once you see something move, you are advised to get out as quickly as possible, as the haunted cabins are considered dangerous. Now that we understand the premise of the Cabin Factory, let's dive into the Uncanny Valley. Freud, a notable early psychologist who laid a lot of groundwork for the advancement of many psychological concepts later down the road, discussed it as well. Freud expands on Gent's, I don't think I'm saying that right, 1906 definition of the uncanny as being something, quote-unquote, fundamentally familiar, yet unfamiliar. Lifelike, automata, and waxworks being some of the examples cited. Masahiro Mori, the Japanese robotist, was the first person to discover the Uncanny Valley itself, rather than just the feeling. A few of the subjects that Mori tested were an industrial-grade robot and a toy robot, but he found that once human likeness reached a certain point, the affinity we feel with those items dropped drastically, creating the Uncanny Valley. He had a few ideas for this, but it wasn't until others continued his research that a culprit for this drop was identified. I feel compelled to say at this point that correlation does not mean causation, and causation is near impossible, if not impossible, period, to establish. in any scientific manner. That being said, to avoid sounding like I am writing a dissertation, I'm going to speak on this subject in the way that I believe the relationship to be. But please understand that nothing can really quite be proven to have a direct cause and effect in science, or at least in the soft sciences, which is what we'll be discussing today. While I am interested in how the Uncanny Valley shows up in media, Masahiro Mori was not. In fact, he eventually came to the conclusion that robot builders should not attempt to make their creations overly lifelike in appearance and motion. That being said, others tended to disagree and continued his research. Now that we understand how the Uncanny Valley was discovered, let's move on to how the research is developed. Many approaches took an evolutionary perspective on explaining why we become disgusted and uncomfortable with robots and near-human likeness. These studies surmised that we developed this as a mechanism to avoid bodies that had been infected by a plague. That being said, one group of researchers took a different approach than the evolutionary perspective and looked at it from a cognitive aspect. Their prediction when doing this research is as follows. We predict that a decrease in processing fluency due to categorization difficulty may be associated with a negative evaluation of the observed non-human agent in the Uncanny Valley phenomena. What this means in layman terms is that they predicted that the longer it took people to categorize a face as real or not real, human or non-human, the more that face would give them an eerie or uncomfortable reaction. They did 3 different experiments where they showed faces in various states of morphing with different representations of media, such as a human face and a stuffed animal face, and a human face and a cartoon face. What they found is that when observers were asked to judge faces mixed with cartoon and stuffed faces, participants took the longest time to identify how they felt and scored the lowest likability scores, meaning they disliked it the most. They did not see this effect when the 2 faces morphed in experiment 3 were human faces, meaning instead of a human and a non-human face, they took a human and a human face. To summarize, they found what they thought they would find. The longer it took someone to identify a face, the lower they would rate it in terms of likability. This does not prove the Uncanny Valley, as there are always edits to be made in research and studies and different ways to approach topics, which they do identify later in their discussion. But it does support my theories regarding horror games and why the Uncanny Valley makes us uncomfortable. So it works for me. One last bit of sciencey research nerd stuff that I'd like to bring up is a study from Marcus Cheatham. I'm not sure if I said that right. I'm going to be real. In his study on the Uncanny Valley, he discusses the categorization difficulty hypothesis, which I believe best describes the effects from the last study we discussed. His words read as follows. This posits that subjective difficulty assigning a categorically ambiguous stimulus to the human or non-human category induces a negative affective state. What this is saying is that when people find it difficult to identify a stimulus as human or non-human, they generally experience negative emotions, which is kind of the exact same thing the last study found, but it's cool that it happened twice. The most exciting part of this article to me was the word ambiguous, because it connects to another theory that I discussed in my video on the Cabin Factory's horror mechanics. In McAndrew's article, he discusses horror video games, and specifically how the environment evolutionarily leads us to identify someone as creepy or spooky. He does not really discuss the Uncanny Valley, but the ambiguity of threat theory he discusses aligns perfectly with the categorization difficulty hypothesis that we've discussed in the previous 2 research studies. After surveying 1,300 individuals online, researchers found evidence consistent with the idea that feeling creeped out is a response to the ambiguity of threat. We get creeped out by people when they act in unpredictable ways, violating the social conventions we understand. It makes it difficult for us to understand their intentions and difficult to predict their behavior. To summarize, when we are presented with ambiguity, we get uncomfortable. What's really cool to me is these are 3 different studies on 3 different continents, low-key, and all of them mention ambiguity as the biggest factor leading to the Uncanny Valley, or in other terms, feeling creeped out or uncomfortable. Ambiguity, man. So now that we've gone over some of the research on these subjects, my official theory is that anytime we are unable to identify someone's intentions or status of human or non-human, they become spooky or threatening. The reason the Cabin Factory is one of the best examples of this is due to the format of the game. You are investigating cabins to determine if they are artificially spooky or if they are truly haunted. Some of the jump scares and general scares are truly horrifying, but the mechanic that makes the game so special is the fact that you don't know what to expect. All you are told is that if something in the cabin moves, it is haunted and thus considered dangerous, and you need to get out. The problem is, though, is that the cabins can be haunted without being dangerous, so you never quite know if it is a clear, not haunted cabin, a cabin that is haunted but not lethal, or a cabin that is lethal. Some of these scares can range from a little boy in a rocking chair to the parents in the cabin coming to life to chase you out of the house. Some of the cabins have some horrifying imagery too. Some that I would say would line up with what could be considered as the Uncanny Valley, but those cabins aren't haunted, technically, in accordance with the game's mechanics. Your first playthrough, you do not know which category a cabin will land in, so you are constantly kept on your toes. The game messes with the player's expectations and never allows them to feel comfortable in what to expect. I discussed Outlast in my last video because that is the first game that came to mind, so I'm going to use it again here. When you play a game like Outlast that is considered scary, the jump scares and chase sequences will certainly stress you out, but you never expect anything different. None of the chase sequences are surprising in what happens when you're caught. When you see the characters in Outlast, you are fairly comfortable in your expectations of them, which is why a lot of veteran horror players who are used to the stress that comes with being vulnerable in a horror game do not find it particularly scary. But games like The Cabin Factory that don't let you become comfortable in what to expect will consistently get its players, because until you memorize every single cabin, it's like playing a new game every time you enter the site. One last bit of research I want to bring up is from Mark Grimshaw. Grimshaw takes an interesting approach and discusses the Uncanny Valley in terms of computer game audio design. As it currently stands, the sound samples do not significantly change across multiple replayings of a game, and thus what might once have been an unfamiliar and uncanny environment becomes familiar and mundane. The user becomes habituated to the sounds and their use within the game world, and knowledge replaces uncertainty, thus increasing the confidence at the expense of fear. This is exactly what I've been saying. He then suggests the following. Real-time sound synthesis, procedural audio, may go some way to solving this issue, increasing rather than lessening uncertainty and fear, by allowing the game engine to sonically respond in a relatively unpredictable manner in real time to the player's presence and actions in the game world. Additionally, increasing use of biofeedback coupled with procedural audio techniques may well allow game engines to more precisely manipulate the player's emotions through real-time analysis of the player's emotional state. In this case, the game engine can then itself make flexible decisions as to how to play with the player's emotions. The player is too calm? Then perhaps increase the level of sonic uncertainty. Let's imagine you're playing Back 4 Blood or Left 4 Dead, two games that would be categorized as horror, but not in the same horror category as something like Outlast or the Resident Evils. Imagine you are in a safe room in between portions of the run, and instead of the quiet background music you normally hear, you hear a soundtrack that is building up. Maybe you hear scratches at the door and zombies groaning from the zone as this musical audio sequence increases in tempo. Even if nothing happens, although I think an amazing addition to this sequence would be zombies breaking in from the former zone, pushing players into the next one. But even if nothing happens, the players would still be left baffled and anxious. What caused the change in music? Did we miss an objective? Couple that with some actual game design mechanics, and I think you successfully throw players off of their game. Again, I'm not someone involved in game design in the slightest, so take all this with a huge grain of salt. I like to hear myself talk, and I love horror games and science, albeit soft sciences, so that is what I'm here to do and talk about. I haven't seen a game in a long time that got me the way The Cabin Factory did. If I had to pull from memory, the last one similar to this was probably Madison. I remember playing through Madison and being genuinely exhausted afterwards because of the toll it took on my nervous system. At the time, I just attributed this to jump scares, but I believe the developers of Madison structured its levels very similarly to The Cabin Factory. Again, make sure you've got your grain of salt nearby, because the last time I touched Madison was 2022. But if I recall correctly, you could never truly identify if you were in a peaceful part of the game or if the big bad was hunting you. You could go half an hour without seeing her, or 5 minutes. It was very random how often she would show up, which kept me on my toes the entirety of the 8 hours I played it. It was exhausting, but it was also a constant state of fear and uncertainty because, say it with me, it was ambiguous on whether there was a threat or not, which again isn't exactly the Uncanny Valley, but I think the Uncanny Valley ties into a horror mechanic that a lot of modern day horror games miss out on. It's this uncertainty of what to expect from the game. Most horror games you play, you expect that the the villains, the enemies, are going to try to kill you. And although the way they try to kill you and the mechanics in which you have to avoid them can change and bring new interesting designs to horror games, unless the player's expectations are violated in some way that throws them off balance, it becomes a bit of a repetitive experience, which, as Grimshaw said, takes fear and uncertainty to confidence and familiarity. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. This was not meant to be a bash on any of the horror games I mentioned. I love Outlast. I love Left 4 Dead. Back 4 Blood could have been better. But it was meant to be more of a nerd piece and a love letter to the Cabin Factory. And in a way, a love letter to Madison as well. I like horror games, but they become repetitive once you grow used to the environment, the set pieces, and the big bads. I would love to see more games like the Cabin Factory and Madison that don't give their players the opportunity to get comfortable. But that's as much yapping as I have today. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to this point in the video, you have my love and affection. And I also stream all of the games we talk about on Twitch over on twitch.tv/kxcobraful. I need to start restreaming on YouTube, but I always forget about it, so I'm sorry. But if you'd like to keep up with me over there, that is where I'm consistently producing content at, so I would love to see you. Tell me what you think. Is there a horror game that really threw you off balance as well? I would love to hear about it. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace!